All right. Well, sorry about those technical difficulties, people out there. Welcome to the Bloodline of Trauma,
And
Breaking
it keeps freezing.
and Building Futures. We got some technical difficulties. Just bear with us. Oof. I'm Talib Mugambi, the Executive Director of the Ultimate Reentry Opportunity Initiative, housed here at the Cornell Cooperative Extension. Our mission is to eliminate systemic barriers to reentry. And from our perspective, that really covers what happens to an individual or group of people even prior to them being arrested. Our organization uses a combination of collective impact approach and asset-based community development to communicate ideas, foster collaboration, and a development of programming essential to the prosperity of our local and global community. We believe that the reentry population represents the most vulnerable and stigmatized population in our community, and who also have the steepest hurdles to overcome in order to make good for themselves. They need us shining this light on these issues, and that is what we are doing. Before we move any further, I do want to take this time to acknowledge a dear friend of ours who left us a short time ago. This dear friend was a giant in the community, a servant of the people, a person, when they asked you, how are you? This person really wants to know how you're doing. Without this person, this initiative wouldn't be here today. For that, I'm sure. So you all, her and Michelle, none are the founding community. But because I really owe it to them for creating such an opportunity to do great things. I hope as Audrey is looking down, she is smiling. And some of you might know Audrey. And if you don't, just know that Audrey told it how it was and didn't sugarcoat anything. If you didn't like Audrey Cooper or you're happy she elevated from this plane to the next, it's probably because you didn't like hearing the truth about yourself to your face with such ferocity that we all know Audrey could deliver the truth with. To Audrey, thank you for having the courage to be bold and to create something that is so life-producing. On to this episode that we're going to have here. This is the second episode, our second episode. Our first was in April. We took a little bit of time to learn and figure out how to really do this thing. But this is the first of what I think is a three-part series woven in over several months. There is simply no way that we can get this done when we talk about excavating intergenerational trauma. There's no way we can get this done in one session, but I think breaking it up over several months gives the panelists time to digest what they've heard and learned from each other and to do their due diligence so as to elevate this conversation for the next time we meet. There will be other episodes in between as we have a lineup for October, November, and December. This will be a slower and more arduous journey for those of you who are tested with patience, but you have much to gain. You ask, what do we have to gain? We have closeness to gain. We have togetherness to gain. We have improved systems for all human beings to gain. We have compassion to gain. We have love for all humankind to gain. And the list is endless. So we have much to gain from doing this work. Previously in our first show, we had what I call content knowledge houses, meaning an individual is a house and they contain a particular type of information, and those were the content knowledge houses. And now we're getting ready to hear from the context knowledge houses, folks who have a lot of lived experience. This panel will begin the process of excavating an awareness and an understanding of trauma, communal trauma, intergenerational trauma, structural and systemic trauma, some of which are the result of how poor and marginalized communities are policed, not just in this present time, but over many generations. In addition to the trauma series, we are also putting together a trauma responsive municipal certification working group, which is comprised of individuals in the sectors of health, healing, employment, education, housing, transportation, social services, food security, food systems, and the legal system. For further information, please visit our website at urotc.org. Moving forward, now I'm going to pass the mic to Cosimo Fabrizio, a student coming to us from Cornell University, also the chair of the Student Justice Coalition. So without further ado, our moderator who will be facilitating this show, Cosimo Fabrizio.
Thanks, Talit. Hope everyone can hear me all right. I got introduced to URO only a couple months ago, and in the few months that I've been knowledgeable about it, I've been really impressed to see the great work that's been done, and excited to be involved in this discussion today. The structure of today's talk, I'm going to go through a couple brief introductions, open up to some general questions, and then we'll transition and give every one of the panelists, who, like Talit mentioned, has incredible depth of lived experience, an opportunity to reflect a little bit on their personal experience, kind of wrap up with a Q&A, and then hopefully by 7 have had an hour and a half of good conversation. So again, given the experience of all of these panelists, I'm not going to be able to do justice and say everything that everyone has ever done, but just for some context, and obviously they can elaborate too, I'll go through now. First, panelist, Ms. Shawanna Vaughn. She's the director of Silent Cry, an incredible activist, and you'll hear more about her work almost related to some of the legislative things that have been happening in New York State in the past couple of years related to intergenerational trauma. Second, joining us, Mr. Joe Soto. I know you're having some connection problems, so if at any point in time you can't hear me, feel free to just type me a message and we'll handle it. But Mr. Soto does a lot of incredible work out of the Traditional Center for Indigenous Knowledge and Healing, and will bring an invaluable perspective to this conversation. Next up, we have Mr. Tony Sidle from Civic Ensemble. He also does a lot of work, and past, present, hopefully future, with the Ithaca Drug User Union, and also with the Reentry Theater program. Excited to talk more about that, being a musician myself. And then last but certainly not least, Miss Yasmin Rashid from Unbroken Promises. She's the vice president there. Again, another grassroots activist, done a lot of incredibly community-oriented initiative, led a lot of incredible community-oriented initiatives in the past couple of years. And we're excited to have all these people here today for this conversation on intergenerational trauma. So to start things off, this is a question for everyone. And then again, beyond here, we'll kind of open it up for individual people to speak a little bit more in depth about their experience. But how do you define and trace intergenerational trauma? It's something that is kind of vague. If you haven't been exposed to the concept, it's something that I could understand people being a little bit confused about, given its abstraction. But for all of you, however you want to tackle that question, how do you define and trace intergenerational trauma?
I guess I can go first. I would define generational trauma for myself as being born in prison, as having a mother who was incarcerated, a father who was incarcerated, and 3 out of 4 siblings have all been incarcerated. So I look at that as generational and legacy trauma that, we're here to try to break. So that's how I look at legendary trauma as families and cycles that touch from one generation to the next and from one experience to the next. And so I believe that trauma is transmitted at some point. And how do we stop the transmission of trauma? So that's how I would view trauma for myself and for my family.
If I can everybody hear me now? I'm still having signal problems over here, but I'll do the best I can. I look at intergenerational trauma from a historic perspective, and how it impacts not just my family, but all our families with people of color. Is not subject to just people of color, but also some of our non-native, non-brown, non-black brothers and sisters also suffer from intergenerational trauma. And when we look at it from a historic perspective, we can trace back where that trauma comes from. And understanding where it comes from can lead to a greater understanding of how it impacts our communities. We all like to look at our communities as being separate, but we're more connected than we think. And this is not just, conducive to the suffering of Indigenous people of different races. I think we're at a time where we've become aware through the history of trauma and how trauma has infiltrated, different societies throughout the world, and the impacts that it has had in how we pass that along to our children. I kind of think and agree with you, Shawanna, that it is passed on down through our DNA from one generation to the next. And the cycle of trauma is not broken. We keep passing that on, whether consciously or subconsciously.
Appreciate that. And we'll get into more depth based off of both what Mr. Soto, you and Ms. Vaughn, what you were talking about when we go into the specific questions. Just to build on that and give Yasmin, you and Tony an opportunity to speak. Can you maybe, with that same question, speak a little bit about when you first realized that you yourself were experiencing, or at the very least caught in this cycle of intergenerational trauma? And then we can pivot to some more specific questions. Oh, sorry, can we get maybe Yasmin and Tony, and then Shawanna, we'll start the one-on-one questions kind of off with you. Yeah, no, good. Thank you, though.
I began to realize that I was experiencing intergenerational trauma when stories, began being told of what had happened. What had happened previously, or what has happened previously, is very important to interrupting trauma. You have to know what has happened in order to be able to have better foresight. Hindsight is always 2020. We're supposed to rely on our elders for the hindsight, and that's supposed to, as we grow and we begin to experience life, we take their experiences with what we're dealing with, and that creates a better foresight for us to steer us away from those type of things. When I started experiencing things that I had not necessarily witnessed in my home, but was definitely clearly a condition of a mindset, that's when I began to understand that what I was experiencing was intergenerational and not necessarily a personal, feat.
Right. And Tony, anything?
Yeah, as I was telling you guys earlier, when I was incarcerated this last time, I've got about 18 years total in and out of jails. And when I was incarcerated this last time, things were different for me because I was actually changing and didn't even realize it. And I was watching like the children of the crack and heroin epidemics of these major cities, like having serious attention issues with like doing anything and everything to get attention from somebody. They didn't care if it was cutting somebody's face or slam dunking a basketball or writing a cool poem or whatever attention they could get is what they wanted. And everybody has come to the conclusion that most drug addicts are traumatized peoples. And this war on drugs was just really a war on traumatized peoples. I myself didn't even realize I suffered from intergenerational trauma because I was raised by Vietnam vets. And my father and both my parents did not adjust well to the things they were involved in Vietnam. And that came on to me. And while I was watching these kids in jail, I was like, no, this isn't going to be my kids. I couldn't let it happen like that. So like I told you guys earlier, I was really excited to be a part of this when I was asked.
And for me, again, I'm just happy to be a part of this, but I just turned 21. So hearing all of you speak, the common thread, and we'll get more into it, this idea of awareness of the cycle, the idea of education on these issues, and the idea of breaking it for future generations. That's something that was instilled in me too. Neither of my parents were ever incarcerated, but my pops grew up, lower income house in Newark, New Jersey, was a public school teacher, just retired for the third time. And my mom immigrated from, I don't know if you guys know Grenada in the Caribbean, but worked $2 an hour when she got here undocumented for 10 years. So it's the same kind of thing I think that you guys are speaking to, is this idea that this is something that you need awareness, and then the purpose, even if you yourself can't always break it, which I know we'll get into more too, how can we help future generations? So appreciate you guys taking that perspective. Kind of with that, the first person that wanted to ask a direct question, Shawanna, you, with your work with Silent Cry, I've heard that you've gotten involved in some legislation, which is something, obviously, the best way sometimes that we can make long-term substantial change is to actually change what the rule of law says. And I see that you're someone who's really taken that as much as you can. And I believe on the last episode of this show, which I wasn't hip to, but I'm getting caught up on things. You spoke a little bit about post-traumatic prison disorder and the Shawanna W7633 Act that you brought before New York State Senate. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? How did you take the issues that you already spoke to in your first kind of set of responses? How did that lead you to creating legislation, and what did that process end up looking like?
I began to understand that if we do not take in charge of the legislative branch, nobody will. There's nobody coming to save us but us. And I mean all formerly incarcerated, and generational people in trauma. Nobody's coming for us, because there are people in power that don't even understand the plight that we're talking about. And I said, why am I waiting on a bill for mental health when I know what it is? It's mine. It belongs to everybody that looks like me and everybody who suffered. And I took out my prison diaries. My good friend Pamela Stewart Martinez came to help me, and we flushed out legislation from prison diaries. And it created post-traumatic prison disorder, Shawanna W76337. Currently, we're going into this legislative session, and we're going back to get this bill passed. And we know that legislation is not an overnight thing, but it is a solution, and it's only one. It's one drop in the bucket to everything else that needs to happen. And I know without legislation, what are we screaming for? What are we marching for? We need money put behind trauma. We need money put behind pain. We give money to incarcerate, but we don't give money to treat. And one of the most amazing women on my board is Dr. Coraline Griffith Hunt. And she always says, we treat the fruit, which is punitive, but we never treat the root cause of trauma. And so post-traumatic prison disorder looks like we're asking for holistic, comprehensive therapy for those who are incarcerated 14 days upon incarceration. We're asking that guards get therapy because they become harmful. And, we're asking that we cut recidivism. If we can get people mentally well, we can create new communities, because our communities are in trauma. Black and brown communities, not even in prison, are just in trauma. And we're clear about that. So post-traumatic prison disorder aims to reduce recidivism and bring home healthy people. Because guess what? Nobody deals with our trauma in prison. Nobody ever scratches the surface. And so we need trauma-informed therapists. We need therapists that look like the people incarcerated. And we need a new approach to healing. And it's not a textbook. We are not textbook. We're individuals. And we need individualized plans to treat us. And that's what it looks like for me, Cosimo.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just say again, you might take it for granted that you taught yourself and were able to take enough initiative to get to a place where you firmly have legislation before the New York State Senate, right? And that's not a small thing. So congratulations on that. And I wish you the best of luck with it. For people who you talked about this concept that came out of your prison diaries, this idea of this post-traumatic prison disorder. it might seem obvious to you because you've lived through it and because you're the one who actually grinded through this work to get this legislation to where it is. But for people who might not be able to make the link as clearly, given their lack of lived experience, could you just explain how what you were saying before about intergenerational trauma, how does that then lead into post-traumatic prison disorder from the way that you've kind of conceived it?
So for me, my trauma, whether I was aware or not, started in prison. I was born in Cornell State Prison, April 15th, 1978. I was born to a mother. They talk about slavery, and Mr. Soto was talking about, historically. Well, historically, I was born on a plantation in 1978, still slavery. And so his history doesn't go back 400 years for me, 43. And we don't talk about the children that are born in prison to shackled and chained mothers. Imagine what kind of stress you come into the world to a mother who's trying to give birth with shackles and chains on. You're born in trauma. Where do you go from there? And we're not even going to talk about the foster care system that, many of us have ventured into from prison. And then I was back to prison at 17. That's just my own trauma. So imagine the community. Imagine what happens when you take a mother, a woman out of a community and you put them in prison. And Antony Sidle said something important: substance abuse. My mother wasn't given an alternative to prison, and she was a drug addict. She needed help. She needed rehabilitation, not prison. Prison is not a rehab. Prison is not a mental health facility. Prison is not a way to rehabilitate out of any bad behavior. Prison is a way to be worse. It has no treatment mechanism to it. And so because we don't give, it's not even a war on color, it's a war on poverty. It's a war on poverty. Anyone in poverty we do not treat, we discard, and we put them in prison. And we create communities that implode. That's generationally on purpose, historically on purpose. None of this is by design or accident. And this is why I say it's on us to heal us, because nobody's coming for us.
Yep. And that's the initiative. Again, we can't take that for granted. And what you said, this idea that people, I think there's been more awareness in recent years about all things criminal justice in this country, which is a positive thing. And with that, there's been more awareness about what happens when you remove men from a community, specifically the Black community. But the one thing you don't hear a lot about is what happens when you take away the mothers from the community. And even less you hear about what happens when these mothers are still mothers, even though they're in prison, right? What happens there? And similarly, and moving on, Mr. Soto, to you now, I think another group that we don't hear enough about is where Indigenous people fall into this entire conversation. And that's something that we're very fortunate to have your perspective here. Can you just talk a little bit about how you see this intersection that exists between Indigenous trauma, oppression, and colonialism? And I think that there's a lot of overlap here between, again, Ms. Vaughn, what you were talking about, how you saw this was you being born on a plantation. It's the same, like a new manifestation of the colonialism that was the foundation and what all these systems that you're talking about are predicated on. Mr. Soto, can you talk a little bit about how you see that from your perspective, how these things are intersect? I know that's a big question.
It's a huge question that carries a lot of implication in a lot of different ways. And one of the ways that it carries implication is that when brown and Black people are dealing with trauma, we try to deal with it separately. And it's the same thing. It's not different. We want to look at it different, because we're different people, but it's not different. The methods that are instituted to superimpose these white supremacist ideologies are the same thing. They're not different. And I think that's kind of some of where we sometimes get a little bit mixed up. I look at it from a historical perspective when we got invaded by Columbus. I have to understand too that, understanding that when Columbus came, my family was 100% of indigenous blood. But I'm also part African, although I'm from the Caribbean, but I'm also part Algonquin because it's a slave trade. And these are the things that sometimes I think get obscured when we're trying to deal with the traumas that we have. We forget that we're only dealing with one part, but we have to deal with the whole. We just can't deal with one of it, one section of it only. So structurally, if I would look at myself from a physiological standpoint of view, I'm about 50 to 65% of pure Indian blood. I'm a quarter indigenous. I'm also Irish. With that comes all this other the stuff. So when I look at this mess in my DNA, I have to say, holy cripes, what's going on here? You know, I do sometimes genealogy when I was working for the court system, and my you know, I'm a really curious person out of nature. So when I was doing my genealogy, you know, people's genealogy, I like to go back not 2 generations as the system has proposed, because you just don't deal with anything when you go back just 2 generations. You got to go back further, at least 3 to 5 different generations, and then you start to see this pattern of oppression that's being handed down from one community to the next community. So it's not just endemic to Black and white and brown people, it's a community issue from its roots. And again, I believe that it's by design. Of course, this is my opinion, and my opinion only based on the research that I've done. When I look at it, I can't just kind of like just deal with one aspect of it. I have to look at all my little parts that makes me me to understand, why was I a drug addict? Why did I drink so much alcohol? And why did I do the things that I did? You know, and it wasn't just because my dad beat me, you know, which he did. It was because there was already an endemic problem happening that was being handed down from 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different generations. This was a pattern that I chose to look at from a way in which I can break. So let me give you an instance. My dad was an extreme alcoholic. My mom suffered from schizophrenia. Okay, I'm talking about the 1960s and beyond. And I can clearly remember, you know, the day the Indian agent, together with a CPS social worker and a United States Marshal, entered my father's home, served my dad papers. My dad, broken. He was broken, a broken man, signed those documents. My mom not able to defend herself and her children, and we be taken off to boarding school. So I'm part of the 60s swap. So talk about slavism, you know, the way that the system, and I can identify with Shawanna totally, because even though I wasn't born in the system, by the age I was 5.5, I was already in the system as a person that, according to those nuns, would never even make it to purgatory because I was a half-breed. That's the message that I got, you know, not, mind you, not also seeing, like we're dealing today, you know, all those missing children that they're finding in those residential boarding schools in the United States. I saw that with my very own eyes, you know, teenagers, you know, 16, 17, 18-year-old carrying these blankets, you know, these little blankets wrapped up, you know, us not really understanding what was going on, and not understanding that there were bodies being taken either to a crematory or buried in unmarked graves. So talking about set up for failure, I was already set up from the get. know, not just me, but all those that were implicated in that. And then we have the civil rights movement. We have all the stuff that was going on back then, and all these things that were happening all at once, but nobody was watching that. They were taking Mexican kids, Puerto Rican kids, kids of indigenous backgrounds, and locking them up in these boarding schools because, according to New York State Department of Social Services, the families weren't capable of raising their children, which is, you know, that's intergenerational trauma right there itself, you know. So when we talk about this, you know, it's much, you know, a much larger issue. So when we're working with people, whether they're Black, brown people, the first thing we do is do the identifier. We need to be able to identify with them. How do we do that? You know, and one of the things that we have in common, very much so, since we're children, you know, since we come out of our mother's womb, is that we can identify with the trauma in the same exact way. It's not different. What makes us different is the way that we respond to it, how we react to our environment, you know, how we interact with other people. Because, you know, in my community, people think I'm dark, but they're darker Indians than me. And then we got Black Indians too. Talk about classism, go to my neighborhood and you would see it played out right in your face. And those are the things, that's the generational trauma that we have to break. We have to be able to start looking at each other, whether we're lighter, whether we're darker, whether we're, you know, kind of different, to be able to identify with the source of what's keeping us enslaved to our communities. And when we start looking at that, like I'm getting ready to go, I just had a meeting with a brother from California who's introducing another brother that's that was kind of involved in some incident with the Black Panthers back in the day. And we're getting ready to go into Rikers to work with the younger generation. And this is what we're going to bring in. You know, we're going to create a program, or we're going to try to create a program, but we can't do that program without the inmate's consent and without the correctional consent. So for some reason, this person that's this commissioner that's involved in this, she's invested to see some kind of change happen. So we're kind of starting to kind of tackle and kind of attract other people in the communities that we work in, to get some of the people with knowledge, some of the elders that have, you know, been through the system or not, you know, that are knowledgeable, to begin to share knowledge with these younger people so that we can begin to give them hope. But first, there's that trust building. They ain't gonna trust us for nothing. I mean, I was in Rikers Island when I was 15. You know, and you know, I mean, that's a hellhole. Have you ever been to Rikers Island? It's a hellhole. You know, when I walked in Rikers Island when I was 15 and all those people saw my nice brand new sneakers, you know, I had to fight for my stuff. You know, imagine in 2021.
No, I couldn't. That's what I know.
So, but the you know, what I'm trying to bring is it to this conversation is, you know, there's kind of 4 to 7 components that are missing, and one of them is the spirituality that Black and brown people share. You know, I usually, when I start my conversations with any group of people, I usually open it with a prayer and I close it with a prayer. You know why? Because it's not that I'm looking to be holier than thou or looking for God or anything like that. I need guidance. And sometimes I need to depend on the community for that guidance. They're the ones that really know what it's needed. You know, I'm just one person, but we're together, we're a bunch of people, and everybody has an input, but we have to stop competing with each other. Who's doing it better than who?
Right. Right.
And that's another part of the issue, that we're competing with each other. Everybody wants to be the big kahuna, or everybody wants to be the chief. Nobody wants to be the Indian. I want to be the Indian. And I want to be the Indian because I love my people. This is not about me. It's not about how much I can get out of this. I'm looking at trying to save young people's lives and move ourselves to a different direction that we've been in for the last 50 years.
Right.
I've lost a nephew. We all have stories like that.
Right.
We all have these stories that talk about the pain that we're in.
Right. And Joe,
I just kind of want.
No. Listen. I could listen to you all day. We'll have to wrap more after this too. But I appreciate it, and I will say, kind of connecting what we had already heard, even in people's intros, is you're talking about how there can be so much diversity of lived experience, but still there's still this unifying factor of this intergenerational trauma. It doesn't matter what race, creed, indigenous, what like niche of we're just talking about maternal. Or mothers in prisons and all these groups that you never hear about. That is the thing that unifies them. And I wanted to move to.
I just wanted to end with one more thing.
Sure.
Okay, because this is the most important part of all this.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't give our women their rightful position, especially African women and indigenous women who led communities, part of our historical aspect of who we are, in the center of that is our women. And we need to stop sexualizing our women, and we need to stop gentrifying our women and give them back that place.
Absolutely.
So that they can help us understand the bigger reality that surrounds all this.
Absolutely. And I guess kind of on that note too, this idea of something unifying very unique and distinct perspectives. Tony, you were speaking a little bit about how users come into all of this. And I know you have done some work specifically in Ithaca with the Drug User Union. Can you start by just talking a little bit about your experience there, how you might have gotten involved, and how that can kind of connect to this broader conversation around intergenerational trauma, and based off of what Joe was just telling us, taking a lot of different forms and a lot of different lived experiences?
We started the Ithaca Drug Users Union because of all the things that we experienced going through outpatient and inpatient programs. And because like drug abuse is one of the only illnesses where if you fail to comply by your treatment, it's all on you. Whereas it's not on your doctors, or it's just out of our hands because the cancer was so bad. It's blamed solely on the addict. It's their fault that they didn't get it right, and that feeling kept me out there for years. And it's really hard because like harm reduction means you're meeting people where they're at. So if you're meeting somebody where they're at and they need a beer at 8 a.m. to be able to get out and face the day, that's, it's like there's a fine line between enabling and harm reduction. Seatbelts are harm reduction. Condoms are harm reduction. The needle exchange programs are harm reduction. And people don't understand that with these programs, these people build relationships with them and then eventually find their ways to treatment or not. And like I don't live 100% sober life. I do a lot of different things that don't include hard drugs, but I don't preach that to anybody. And the main part of harm reduction is like what Shawanna was saying about mental health, is it's not a textbook thing. It's not one size fits all. It's for every, I'm like, I could listen to Joe and Shawanna speak all night myself, because that is some very, very heavy stuff that they're saying. And it's all true, and for me, the harm reduction philosophy that I adhere to, it's put to the test the most when it's like at my doorstep or in my house. because that's when I really find out, what do I really feel about all this stuff. And, like the recovery communities here in Ithaca are great. But they could be better, like anything else. And a lot of people are treated poorly even there. So like, you get treated poorly at the inpatient and outpatient program. You get treated poorly at the AA meeting or the NA meeting or whatever it is. Then where do you go? So we say, come here. Tell us what's bothering you. Let's talk about this. Let's relate to this, because sharing all this is how we're going to get through it.
Right.
And I'm a big believer in genetic DNA memory. I have no doubt that Shawanna experienced incarceration while she was being born. That I couldn't imagine that. That's awful. And Joe, I went through the same system a little bit behind you.
Well, I think the idea that you and Joe, I know you didn't speak about it maybe as directly, you did talk about that you had some initiative going on with Rikers, and Shawanna, you talked about your legislation. I think it's such a beautiful thing. And I know Yasmin will get into it a little bit too after this, but I think it's such a beautiful thing that you're able to take these experiences and put it to something productive and be more solution oriented. And another way that you've done that is with this theater group, right? And I thought it was interesting, almost, Shawanna, because I'm a jazz musician by trade. Like that's what my pops got me into growing up. And in getting more into this work, specifically doing juvenile work, understanding the role that arts and music play in this experience of transitioning towards some sort of personal growth after, sometimes being in your darkest point. Can you speak a little bit about how you got involved in that work? And also, don't want it to be as siloed as I might have presented it as. So if anyone else has other thoughts on this too, please feel free to share. But Tony, to you specifically, how does this reentry theater program help you and other people who get involved heal these wounds that intergenerational trauma creates?
Well, I mean, like, it's pretty cool to see somebody else live out your life. And you get to, it's almost like being able to look at it from a different perspective. But it's also a place to where we can work through these traumas in a safe place.
Right.
And our latest play, actually, Delia Divided. Well, that's our next play. We have a radio play right now on WRFI. I believe it's on at 3 p.m. For the next 3 weeks. It's called Stepping Into My Shoes. It's the Reentry Theater radio program. 30 different peers were interviewed, and we spliced some stuff together and made something out of that. But our next play, Delia Divided, after we got done with Streets Like This, we're like, what do we do next? And this woman was like, we're doing mental health. And going into that, like, we left so much stuff out of the play just because of the rabbit holes you could go down. But when we came, like Shawanna was saying, Black and Native American women are at the bottom of the chain on all ropes, especially the mental health rope, when they're almost affected the most as the mothers of the community, So I'm really excited that we wrote this play with Judy Tate. She does work with juveniles reentry down in New York, and I'm really excited to do that. And and it just saved my life. And everybody else in the reentry theater, we have like 11 people that are core members. People come, people go, but there's like 11 core members, and everybody believes the same thing, that this has saved our lives. And I have to give a shout out to Sarah and Godfrey for giving us a safe place to work on our traumas, because it's made my life so much better.
And I don't know if this stuff is open to the public and if it's already on URO, but at least for the coalition, I think we started talking with some other people in the org, but would love to see how we can work more to bring those stories to campus, because that's something when I found out about, I was like, I don't know how this hasn't been done more at scale too. And I think it's a brilliant way to kind of tackle these issues that you're talking about. So I hope to be able to even see it, potentially if it's around. I'm going to move on to person who's been, we're moving through questions person by person here, but definitely want to loop in Yasmin to the conversation here. I know that you've done a lot of work with Unbroken Promises, and specifically as vice president of the organization. Can you just talk about how your role helps elevate the voices of people who face these different forms and manifestations of intergenerational trauma, specifically in the West End of Ithaca? And I ask that hopefully we'll have a lot of people from the community watching. We're also planning on sharing this at Cornell. And I think it's oftentimes, at least at Cornell, easy for people to forget that these things that we're talking about here and these issues of criminal justice that may seem like fashionable at the national level, they're actually rooted in and manifest themselves very, very close to home. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So as the, vice president of UPI, the way that I do that is to, first address myself, as Joe and Shawanna, stated, we're more alike than we are different. The experiences are not as different as we think. The action can look a little different, but the mindset and the spirit of the action is the same, So understanding that in myself, and breaking myself all the way down to my most spiritual levels of my soul, allows me to see people for who and what they are, because I can see myself in everyone. And that allows me to be able to lift those voices up easily, because it doesn't smother mine, it only empowers mine further to have the support of my community behind me. If it was not for my community and the intergenerational trauma, I would not be the woman that I am.
And in terms of that, you're talking not only about your own self, even though you start with yourself, but how have you grown? Better said, I'm sure you've grown a lot in seeing the experiences that other people coming to you and that you're helping on a daily basis bring. What are some of the ways specifically maybe that you've noticed or witnessed this intergenerational trauma in your community? As specific as you like, obviously not going into details if it's unnecessary, but maybe something profound, that hits you.
I mean, it's my community. It's all I know. I can feel the pain. You can see the despair in their eyes. You can see the lifelessness in the day-to-day, movements. People are, dead from the head down. It's not even the shoulders down anymore, and it can be heavy to see, especially when you've gotten to the point of understanding the mindset behind these things, because it's way deeper than an action. We all have experienced some type of trauma. For me, my first memories of life, have to do with abuse, and that can be damaging, but it is still also familiar. But understanding what doesn't feel good, and what actually speaks to the highest parts of your being is when you begin to learn how to interrupt that process. I can't just exist as a mother. I can't just exist as a sister or a daughter, or a wife. I must also exist as a woman. And that is what my experience is. It is a woman experience. I was a young girl before I was a mother. You know what I'm saying? And I was a human being before I knew what it was to be a woman. So once I can peel back all of those layers, and understand how the universe speaks to us and calls us, that is what makes it, that's what makes it all, all too easy sometimes.
And especially with that last thing you're saying, I'm assuming that work is never completely done in terms of that understanding. And that's something that has been I think consistent with something everyone has said here is that idea that even though you start getting this awareness from your personal experience from the day that you're born, that it continues to grow in the depth and specificity as you have more and more experience and have more and more time to reflect. And I guess one question that I have for all of you then is, especially knowing that you all are actively engaged in the community and using your experiences to help other people, and specifically, and I'm particularly appreciative of using it to help break these cycles for younger generations so that we don't have to go through exactly what it is that you guys went through. But can you speak a little bit to how does like hope come into this? You know that things are bad. You know that there's stuff that can be done because you're all active in organizations, your own initiatives. You're here today. I don't think you would be if you just thought it was a complete waste of time doing this call or the work you do otherwise. But can you just speak a little bit for people who might be listening and saying, okay, well, yeah, stuff is pretty bad. Like, how do you guys continue to be hopeful? Where do you derive that hope from? And why would you recommend that, people who are looking at a situation and watching this call or being moderating me like 20, 21, let alone 15, 16 years old, looking at you guys and saying, okay, yeah, this is why we need to continue to move forward and push it forward and et cetera. Can you speak to hope a little bit here?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Shawanna. Okay. As far as me being able to instill hope, learning to embody my truth and understanding that that is a process that is lifelong. It's never ending, and being committed to that relationship with myself, and understanding that that doesn't necessarily have a destination, it's a continuum. Every day I grow and my community contributes to that growth. Every step of the way, every morning that I wake up, every phone call that I get, every meeting that I have, it's all for them. Because if they're not all right, I'm still going to continue to be a victim of the same circumstances. I can't just fix myself without creating a better environment. So, instilling hope in the people is important. And you can do that by helping them, bring light to their dark parts,
right.
And using their stories to transmute their shadows. And that's very important. All of our stories matter. All of these experiences, they shaped us to be very different people, and it's important. But as colorful as we are, that's what makes the world spin as much as it does, So learning to get that validation of who I am and what my experience is from me and me alone, that right there is enough, as long as I know how to translate that message to the outer and give it to my people of what my story and my experience, minus college education, minus, high school graduate, because I have my GED, minus all of the statistical categories I wind up in throughout my life, it still made me who I am today. And the things that I've done have only been able to happen because of the good and ill experiences that I've had, both within my community and from people who are not of my community. It all matters, and we have to learn to appreciate people for the experiences that they have. And sometimes that needs to be enough to get them to where they're going, because that level of hustle and drive is something different. And as a people, we have that is part of our being. And that's also what history tells us. You know what I'm saying? And that's important that we hold on to that and not let it go.
I want to add, but I know Shawanna, you were going to come in at the beginning of that, so I'll give you an opportunity to speak first.
Okay, Cosimo, you said hope. And I got to agree with a lot of things that Joe said. And he actually covered hope. Hope is the evidence of things not yet seen, but I know are coming. And I'm not the most religious person either, Joe, but I will tell you this. I know that there is something greater than a human. And so I have hope in the Serenity Prayer. I have hope in Psalms 91. I have hope that everything that I've been through wasn't even for me, that it was so that somebody else could be changed. Because what we know is everybody couldn't be us. And I don't think any of us were picked out to be picked on. But I think that every one of us who goes through something is to make somebody else better. And so my hope comes from being better and not bitter. In all adversity, I tried to make lemons out of lemonade, not just for me, but for my community and my children. Hope is the thing I have for every generation after me. Hope is the reason that I wake up in the morning in whatever adversity to make change for other people. And my hope is that, my hashtag is crying. Pain is like birthing a baby. You got to go through it with no anesthetic. And so my hope is that all of the trauma, all of the pain that we've been through does not transcend to our children and our children's children for 5 generations. And I hope that we wake up with enough hustle and drive to say no more and collectively collaborate to change all generations past us, that we reduce all prisons, that all children have a hope of parents not incarcerated and communities that are not in trauma. And that is my hope. My hope is that I pay the rent that I owe on earth. And that is to do everything I can with every breath that I have to make it better for somebody else, even if it's one person at a time. That is my hope. My hope is that when I close my eyes and I leave this world, that I did one impactful thing to leave it better than when I came. And so my hope is that future generations watch this and say, if they overcame, we can overcome. Because you can only model behavior that you see. So we have to be the change and the hope that we want for the next generation. That's my hope.
And we appreciate you. We appreciate you for it. I'm going to play this back for my mom. She's going to start laughing. But Joe, I see you smiling too. And you were named in this because you were talking about hope. And I think you did touch on why we need, or how we can most effectively use the stuff that we're talking about that is otherwise allows people to become cynical or depressed or whatever, and transform that into something that's a little positive. So I'll give you the floor, and then Tony, if you want to comment on this too, and then I think we'll have to go to Q&A. But Joe, all you.
Thank you, Shawanna, and thank you, Yasmin. You guys kind of nailed it. I think a lot of us in our communities need to start looking more at our mothers. Number one, there's no amount of pain that our women are going through, whether they're black, brown, yellow, red, or white, that any man can trump. And in this time that we're in right now, I get to sit in a lot of circles. I get to sit with a lot, as an elder, I get to sit with a lot of elders. I get to sit with a lot of clan mothers and grandmas. And, and I look around a lot of times and I say, there's something missing. There's something missing. There's something missing. And sometimes what's missing is my relatives. Where are my relatives? Where are my cousins? And people look at me and they say, what are you talking? I said, well, we don't have no black people here. They should be sitting at this table. Yeah, but this is about Indians. I said, no, it's not anymore. It's not about just being Indian. And it's not just about being black. It's not just about being white. It's not just about being Asian. It's about how do we take the understanding that we've gathered through 529 years of oppression and utilize that in a way that empowers our communities. We cannot, and I'm going to repeat that, we cannot, as men, do that by ourselves because we're corrupt. Because our minds are infested with this patriarchy that's beaten the system into our consciousness, that gets played out in every one of our homes through our subconscious minds of how we feel about ourselves. So when we start going back to our origins, we need to look at our women, because the women have the answer to that. We don't. We're kind of, especially my generation, 50s, 60s, 70s on up, we're so comfortable in this pain. We understand this pain, and this pain serves us. But the younger generation, they're thinking about this whole damn thing in a completely different way. And those of us that have become conscious of that, we need to be there to assist the younger generation when they can specifically tell us, from not just a physical standpoint or a spiritual standpoint, but a mental and emotional standpoint, what is exactly that they need. Then we can take that information to our women, sit down and have a dialogue with them, women, and take that and ask the spirit, whether it's God, Jesus Christ, crazy horse, don't matter. We can ask that spirit, what do we do with this? How do we take this information and guide our younger generation into a better way of thinking, and then get the heck out of the way?
Well, we appreciate that. We appreciate that. And in the same way that we can't do it without women, absolutely. It's not like a bunch of 18 to 20-year-olds can do it on their own too, because that history, it's the same idea of communities. It is the stories that get passed down from your elders, from your grandparents, from your parents to you, that give you the kind of insight to go and deal with things. So no, I completely agree. And I know we're trying to stay on schedule here. So Tony, if it's all right with you, we have a couple questions coming in from no, you're still up next. Don't worry, I got you. But you're going to answer the first Q&A, okay? Coming in. The first question we have, people watching on YouTube Live and stuff asking questions. For Tony, what would you say to the systems that continue to harm communities with trauma? And then for Q&A, we're trying to have this go about 20 minutes or so. I think we have about 4 or 5 questions. So, we'll pass it around. If anyone wants to add on, feel free.
Well, I was on the some of the panels that went through the reimagining the policing process that we've gone through over last year. So I've actually said quite a bit. I don't believe that sending armed police officers in with jackboots and guns is the way to intervene on a crisis. I don't think that locking up traumatized people is a way to heal them. I think that, like Shawanna said, this is done by design. A lot of people try to call the system broken. The system's working exactly as it was supposed to. These rich elitists wrote this up, and they're following it, and they're holding on with every breath they can. Mm-hmm. And our greatest resource, as Joe just mentioned, is our children. So I teach my children and all young people the best I can to know that it's not always safe to talk to police. It's not always safe to talk to your neighbor. You got to know who you're talking to, and our children are our most valuable resource. And I feel like, especially with COVID, their education and their futures are being thrown away. Mm-hmm. It's really a mess that we're in. But let's just start with stop further traumatized peoples.
And that's a good place to start. Anyone have anything to add on that? If not, I'll move on to the next one.
Can you ask the question again for me?
The question is, what would you say to the systems that continue to harm communities with trauma? And Tony kind of left us with this step 1. You just got to stop doing it.
I mean, it's a system, right? So there's indoctrination involved. So, it's not just what the system is meant to do. You have to address the mindset and the energy that comes with that type of thought, that type of rhetoric, that type of belief. And you have to tackle that. You know, you can always target the action, but it does nothing. It will not serve traumatized people at all if the mindset is not addressed on both sides, because we have to also learn to stop being so easily traumatized.
And to add to her, what she just said, really important. This is really crucial because one of the things that we miss when we're having these discussions, totally miss, is that there's a doctrine in place called the doctrine of discovery, followed by the papal bull that was instituted in the late 1400s, that's still active and it's part of US law when it comes to Black and brown people. When, you know, to them in the system, we're talking about systems now. In the system, we're still less than human beings. Native people in this country are subhuman, followed by African Americans. And that mentality, that mindset gets played out over and over and over again. And they got it so fine-tuned that we have to find a way to break it down so that we're understanding what's being employed so that we continue not only to recidivate, but to break the system down in a way and where we're not harming each other. Because like Shawanna said, this is all by design. And I think that these two women are both on point with that. But we have to look at why is it still so prevalent? And you go back to those documents that in place, and when was it instituted in the United States as part of US federal law? And when we start to look at that from that standpoint of view, we can begin to undo the problem.
Joe, you are so right with that. And me and my friend, Miss Ruth, were looking at sundown laws. And nobody, I was telling her, I went to Atlanta and I went in a courtroom and their judges still calling people neighbors. Can you believe?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you know what? I'm unconscionable. But then I look at the states where they tell you, you know, even if there's not a sign, you know. And I said, we still have sundown laws in 2021.
Yep.
We're still 3/4 of a human on the books. And though I love legislation, until we abolish the 13th, the 14th, and 15th Amendment, we will not have reciprocity in this country. Until we go back, like you said, to the document of the 1400s, we need to eradicate some laws on the books. We need to take them away. You know, right now there is the Black Bar Law Association here in New York, along with a gentleman, a colleague of mine, Terrence Kofi. They're dismantling pieces of the 1994 crime bill. And what it's going to take, Joe, is exactly what you said, eradication of all the bills from the 1400s. Because every last thing from 1400 to 1800 is not meant for us. It's meant for our demise. And we have to eradicate those. Even while we create laws, we have to take away some as
well. I'm going to keep it moving here. We got a couple other questions in. I'm going to start here. I see a question. In what ways have you seen trauma that may not be recognizable to a person that is oblivious to it because of privilege? It's an interesting question. I don't think privilege has come in too much directly, but obviously we're talking about the people on the receiving end of intergenerational trauma. Now moving a little bit to, okay, well, this is happening, but what about the vast majority of people who live on this earth who are completely isolated from that or choose to be, even if they are exposed to it? Someone want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll answer that kind of briefly. We have to do away with color classism. Want to get to the bottom line of that? Then this class system, like in my community, I would be I would be looked at, even though like I'm more Indian than a lot of Indians. I'm still looked at. I'm black, and I accept that. I got that blackness, but my DNA says contrary. So I have on the outside, I have my ancestral look from our people that came from Nigeria and Algeria and Ethiopia. And then on the inside, I'm all freaking Indian. So, I'm a mess. No, I'm not really a mess, but we have, but, there, and then you got light Indians, you got dark Indians, and you got like really, really dark Indians. And they've taken this class system that comes out of the educational system and instituted it in our communities. So now I'm better than you because I'm light skinned. Or I'm better than you because I got better education. And all these kind of little biases really play a huge role in how our people in our own communities view each other. So I think to some extent, not to the complete extent, answers part of that question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Does anyone want to build off of that? Okay. Oh, sorry. Were you gonna say something? Yasmin?
I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead, Shawanna.
I was saying that, like, one of the, I guess when it comes to privilege, he's eccentric, instead of he's mentally ill and probably has dementia, well, he's a crazy drunk, but he builds a great house. You know what I mean? It's like in the privileged areas, it just seems like their faults are explained away or accepted because they come from a certain background. Whereas, it's just like, Tony, why can't you just get your life together, man? I don't know. Sorry. So.
Yasmin, were you gonna add something? Sorry.
No.
No? Okay. Well, maybe you could kick off this last question. You see, we have to throw it back. The last question I got here is, do you think there's also an economic component to recovering from intergenerational trauma? Many people just drowned in illegal basement apartments in Queens due to the recent storm. We have to be able to provide meaningful jobs paid well. So yeah, can you talk to how does money, financial stability, economic mobility, and specific to the question, this broad economic component, what role does that play in recovering from intergenerational trauma?
It plays a role in building hope, and creating opportunities. And you can't get away from that. You have to be able to, have options of things for, not just education, but, with building wealth. There is no wealth being built in the Black community. We don't talk to our children about financial literacy. We don't know what that is. We don't know how to budget. We count the dollars that's coming and don't count the ones that we have. You know what I'm saying? And it creates bad habits that keep us with the same mindset, that keep us with the inability of forward movement, and it keeps us locked in. So there definitely is a huge economic, component, and there always will be, because if everyone, began making $100,000 a year, they would just change what the definition of poverty meant.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Shawanna, I see you unmuted. Yeah, do you wanna add something?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
You asked what does economic or what does reparations mean to trauma? You know what? We're never going to get 40 acres and a mule, and we're never going to get reciprocity. But what we can get is fair housing. What we can get is food justice. What we can get is a better education for our children. You know, Yasmin said something that was important. She said they'll change the economic standing if we get too close. Guess what? They do not mean for anyone to be equal to the European trash that we have in the class system. But guess what? Black people are the biggest contributors to spending the dollar in America. If it was not for us, the Dow Jones could not even go around. What we have to learn is to hold our money. Economics is power. We have not learned to hold a dollar. And I'm wondering what happened, because we did not used to be these people. We watched a Montgomery bus boycott for a year. We watched people not spend a dollar on anything unnecessary until they got what they wanted. We are the only people who will not hold out. We will spend our money with anybody but each other. If we're looking for some type of reparations, even me right now is saying there has to be legislation. There has to be something in place for marijuana. We are watching it legalized all over the country, but we're watching people that got football numbers from it. Where is the reparation in the community for the war on drugs? And what does that look like? And who are we forcing to give us this money? We just signed Biden just did $1 trillion infrastructure deal. And you mean to tell me that as a criminal justice community of hundreds of thousands, there's 70 million people on some type of supervised provision or have been in this country, 2.5 million people languishing in prison. And you're telling me we don't have the power to tell the government, give us this or we won't do this. Listen, we have power, which results in dollars. We're not using our power. Republican or Democrat, neither one of them mean us any good. So I think we need to galvanize the power we do have and never say we can't meet the economic goal. We can. We're not collectively trying. Because guess what? If we collectively try, Yasmin, I definitely know we can push the threshold to $100,000. Because collectively in numbers, we vote. We vote. We show that we vote. But we don't demand anything for the vote. So if we change our ask and how we believe our communities and what we deserve, we can change the median household income from $25,000 to $100,000. But it would actually take a shift in mindset and galvanizing. If all of us are on this line, that means we're galvanizers. That means we're organizers. That means we got 2 years to 2024 to push the envelope. We got Biden in office from the 1994 crime bill and Kamala Harris, who's incarcerated more people just under the DOJ by herself. And we've demanded nothing as a criminal justice community or told them they're going to have to get the hell out come next election. What are we doing? We can shift it, but the shift is now.
I ain't got but so much to say in response to that. I mean, I will open it up before I wrap things up and just say, with that, if anyone else has any final thoughts, quickly, floor is yours.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to say, I'm impressed by both the women on this panel. So I want to extend my gratitude and appreciation and respect to both of you. In that way, I gather by the way you're speaking, your moms and whatnot, because it is about the future generations, and it is about our children, and it is about our children's children and our children's children's children, and we have a wonderful opportunity to gather our communities. Wherever they may be, and begin to galvanize and process all these concepts and precepts that we've developed over the experiences that we've had individually and in our communities and outside of our communities, to bring all this knowledge together and try to kind of like, we might not agree with each other all the time, but we can agree to disagree, to come together, and we can agree to begin a process of dismantling this system. And we need to do it in our communities first, and we need to do it on a political level afterwards, you know. And I see that, you know, Shawanna, you're working on the political aspect. I'm not a politician. I get in trouble. And Yasmin, you know, it seems like you're a powerhouse in your community. You know, people look up to you. You're not in that position because you didn't earn it. You know, you because you work for it. You know, and you believe in your people and you believe in what you're doing. And that's what we're all trying to do here. And then, you know, I think also in the process of that happening, we also can develop methods under constitutional law where we can regain some of land back. You know, we're actually a part of our organization does that. This is what we're getting involved in, so that Black and brown people can have places where they can grow their own foods. Seed saving, you know, some of these heirloom seeds that haven't been spliced and GMO'd and dissected in 100 different ways, so that we can't get the nutritional value out of the foods like the foods we're eating today. Those are the things that we're looking at. So each one of us is doing something from a different angle. And you know, that's the beauty of it. You know, and now we kind of, I think we're at a place where we can start to begin to bring all that together to a round table and begin to kind of share knowledge and how to help our communities move forward. And that's all I got about that.
I appreciate it. I see Yasmin, you have your hand raised. I feel weird calling on you, but I will if you have a final thought.
Yeah, I do. I just wanted to say, in regards to what Joe said about the women, that's very true. And it's very important, because our role in not just our homes, but in society is that we are the equalizers, we are the balancers. And we must understand, you know, the power that comes with that and tap into that. And one of the ways that we do that is to address who we are. You know what I'm saying? In all states, in all realms, you know, and be serious and intentional about that. You know, I understand that, you know, I wish there was more men that I saw that were vocal, you know, such as yourself, Joe, because I feel like, you know, in this space, my duty and job as a Black woman is to make sure that that space is cleared out, so that the men in my community can come in and say what they need to say and still be made to feel like men without having to diminish themselves. And I understand the power in that. You know, it's a unified front. We both bring balance to each other. So I think that it's important, like Joe said, for women to understand that and for us to do the work to find ourselves so that we can really tap in fully to that ability.
Absolutely. And Tony, if you have anything to close before I wrap things up.
I think I really don't. I think everything that I say a lot, I've heard everybody else say here. And and I think about. So, well, I would like to address, because I heard the second part of the question was about the people that died drowning in the hurricane. And a lot of those, what I saw on the news was a lot of those basement apartments were illegal apartments, which means they were probably cheaper. You know what I mean? So, and one of the first things that Shawanna said was better housing, you know? So I don't want people to think that those people were ignored.
Absolutely. Well, I'll kind of wrap things up quickly here and just say again that I just turned 21. I really feel like I only have but so much business being on this call with you all. But I appreciate you being kind and acting like, you know, I have some sort of place here. I have so much love and respect for you and all that you've been trying to do. And for me personally, it's been a grind over the past year trying to even just, I'm not a big standardized testing guy, but trying to get my LSATs together so that I could go to law school, so that I could continue to work on this stuff. So when I hear you all speaking about this and making it very clear that we need to not only respect history, but also appreciate that the only way that you're actually going to go about changing culture and systems is with education. And education, I promise you, is not what I'm getting at Cornell all the times. It's far more often the case what you get on a call like this and what you get in community and just sitting on the stoop with the old guy on the corner who's just like always there. No one knows what he's doing, but he has a lesson to teach you. And I think in meeting Talia and the URO team, the value and respect on storytellers is something that rarely gets put on the pedestal that it should, but hopefully these discussions in this conversation series continue to do that in a way that teaches kids on a place like Cornell who have no exposure to this stuff, what's going on, and who, for people like me who have, you know, a related but not exactly this experience, reinforces that drive to, okay, I got to go to this class. I got to do this. I got to get this LSAT done. I got to go to law school. I got to keep pushing it because the previous generation moved it along for me. And the only thing I could do with my life is move it on for the next. So with that, I think I'm supposed to share my screen really quickly just to show people this. Oh, it's not working for me. Brianna, I think you might have to.
Well, Cosimo, I know you got to go, but I need you to understand we need you. And without you, we can't exist because you're everything that we're teaching so you can be everything that we need for humanity tomorrow.
I appreciate you.
And
I
Cosmo,
appreciate you.
and Cosmo, you could be my grandson, you know?
Yeah.
I'm serious, you know? So, you know, one of the most important persons sitting right here is you. This is about you. It's not about me. I mean, I could walk out of here and catch a heart attack and be gone. So this is about you. This is about the younger generation. This is about my daughter that's sitting across from me. This is what it's about, you know? So I just kind of wanted to share that. So did a good job, doing a good job. Thanks.
We trying. That's all we can do. We will, if all the panelists could stay on for like 2 minutes after, we'll just talk this down. But for the people that are still watching, I figured it out. Thank you, Brianna, whoever got this up. But this is post feedback survey. Again, these conversations will continue to grow and get better and better by having feedback from people who watch them. So if you have a second, you can just scan this QR code. It should take you to a survey so you could give some feedback and continue to have these discussions improve. But with that said, I'll leave this up for maybe a second, and I'm sure the live stream will kind of stop, and then the panelists, we can kind of talk everything down. But again, very grateful to everyone for tuning in. Grateful for everyone at URO for helping things move behind the scene. I try to name people best I can. Let me get off of this screen share. I know we have Angelina, Temeteu, and Brianna who help make this stuff work behind the scene. And then obviously to the guy behind everything, Talia, for inviting me, for bringing people together, and for making sure that people continue to hear these stories that otherwise would not be told, most certainly. So with that, I'll pause. Talia, I don't know if you want to take over and cut off the live stream, but again, grateful to be here. Thankful, much love, much respect.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. Cosimo, awesome job. This is just proof of what the young people can do. We need more youth involved in our community and coming down off that hill and letting your voice be heard. To all the people who tuned in, thank you very much. Please spread the word. This is about having a conversation in the community that's not just local but global, because that's how big of change that we need. Our motto here at URO is humanizing humans. And I think this conversation did just that. So thank you again to everyone.